Hello there. My name is Nina, and I want to welcome you to this podcast, which is no longer titled the Rescript Me podcast. It is now called Introvert in Chief. And the reason for that is I very much believe in the idea of rescripting the narrative for yourself, taking all the things that people have said about you and writing your own plot. And I want to say that a lot of people have subscribed from the You're Not Too Old video. I will still very much so be talking about that type of content and giving that type of inspiration. But at the same time, I realized that I wasn't exactly in alignment with my truth and that something was missing. When I really dug deeper, I thought about how introversion really guides every facet of my life. It's how I show up in my relationship. It's how I work. It is how I show up with family. It's friendships. It is literally how I move through the world. And so it just made more sense to me to kind of couch what I want to talk about in this podcast and these conversations under the frame of introversion. I also went with the name Introvert in Chief because I was obsessed with magazines growing up, and I still am to a lesser extent, but I wanted to become an editor-in-chief, and I had this whole Devil Wears Prada fantasy in my mind, and I studied journalism at first, and then I switched to English, but I imagined a life in magazines forever. So this is a fun way to pay homage to that. Even though I never got to move to New York, nobody accepted my applications. I ended up in government communications and publishing, which actually was a lot less glamorous. We did not go to Paris Fashion Week. I'll just say that. But I did end up in publishing in one way or another. So this is just a fun way for me to pay homage to something that I've always loved. So I want to jump into today's topic, which is all about being an introvert. So I have always been interested in the psychology of people, how our minds work, the choices that we make, the paths that we take. And I was a psych minor in college. I was an English major, ultimately psych minor. I thought about becoming a therapist or a psychologist at one point, and then I just did not want to be in school any longer. So that was when I just went straight into publishing. But I have always been curious about how our minds tick. So when I was in my early 20s, I found the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is an assessment that you can take to understand what your personality type is. You can be either introverted or extroverted, intuitive or sensing, thinking or feeling, or judging or perceiving. Taking this test was huge for me because it really helped me understand that a lot of the traits that I had and a lot of the things that I was interested in and just the way that I lived my life was actually a real thing, and other people experienced life in a similar way. And that was a huge deal to me because I remember being about 6 or 7 and I would read Reader's Digest magazine, and I would sit in our backyard in the gazebo and read my dad's biology books. And I was just very much into reading and writing and creating, anthropomorphizing the anthills, and just kind of living this rich inner world, this rich fantasy world, I would say. And I always had friends growing up. I had siblings, so I was social, but I just felt very different from everyone else. And there was a point where that was great. But then as I got older, once I got in school and I was the only Black girl in so many of my classes, it got to the point where I started getting teased for being someone who was just different, being into Pokemon and reading and minding my business, which is so odd when you think about it, because how am I bothering somebody else by doing that? But that was my childhood experience. Taking the personality assessment once I got older really helped me feel validated in a lot of ways. It helped me feel like I was a normal person, and the flavor of person that I am, or was, for lack of a better term, is on the list of flavors. Just like ice cream. Y'all remember Baskin Robbins? They had 32 flavors back in the 90s. The fact that mine was actually on there, on that list, was really freeing. It was really incredible. It was really validating. It was very humanizing, because being a Black girl who was quiet and studious and imaginative and a little awkward. You just didn't see that a lot. It was so funny when Issa Rae came out with Awkward Black Girl, because I was like, wait, this is my story. I'm supposed to be acting and starring in this. I know so many Black women and girls felt seen, with Awkward Black Girl. I plan on doing a separate episode about being Black and introverted, because that is just like its own topic, its own issue altogether, especially growing up in the South. So we were a military family. My parents were from New York City, but I grew up in the South. And when I tell y'all the expectations of children to be social to a certain extent is just mind-blowing in the South for Black kids. So we're going to get to that another time. But yeah, I am really proud to be an introvert, because for the longest time I felt a lot of shame about it, especially once I graduated and once I was looking, to start my career. I would read job descriptions and they would always say, oh, we're looking for a go-getter and a self-starter, a people person. They never explicitly said they were looking for an extrovert, but you could tell 100% that is who they wanted, someone who was very comfortable socially. And don't get me wrong, I work for myself now, which I absolutely love. But when I worked in corporate and in government, I did enjoy socializing with coworkers, going to work events. I feel like I've always had a really good school spirit or work spirit where I would show up to things. But at the same time, I preferred to work independently, or maybe with one other person, but not in these huge groups. I preferred to eat lunch outside of the office in my own space and time, and not sit in a huge lunchroom and converse with everybody. And I really wanted to, especially early on in my career, I wanted to just be somebody who put their head down and worked. And unfortunately, that's just not how our society is set up. You need to be visible. You need to have work connections. People need to know who you are, because that's how you get the opportunities. Just to be clear, being an introvert doesn't mean that you are antisocial. There are introverts, for whom those things apply. But it's not always the case, because there are also extroverts who can be shy, who can feel socially awkward or anxious. And I want to make it clear that this podcast, this channel, is also for those people. But I just saw that, okay, the way that I am is not really how things work, specifically in Western culture. Just in case you don't know the distinction or don't know the actual definition of introversion versus extroversion, it's all about where you get your energy from. It does not mean I like people or I dislike people. It means that social interactions can either energize me in the case of an extrovert, or they can drain me, and I prefer to be alone to recharge. In addition to being an introvert, I am also a highly sensitive person. So that means that my senses are always turned up to 1,000. The things that I see and hear and feel and taste and smell are way supercharged compared to someone else. And so if I see a sunrise, it is much more beautiful than a sunrise that somebody who's not as sensitive sees. If I see a piece of art, it moves me. I was watching Leon Thomas's Tiny Desk and I cried, literally cried, because of how beautiful it sounded and just the wonder of Black musicians and Black artistry. So I'm that type of person. Definitely that was another thing when I was younger that I got teased for, because if anybody so much as poked me, even lightly, I would start crying. I remember we had some kind of ceremony at school and I wore this little mini skirt with some heels, some slingback heels. I did not bring my PE clothes to change into. So I was out on the field playing kickball in a mini skirt and heels. When I went to go and kick the ball, as you might expect, I slipped and fell on my butt because I had on the improper shoes. And this girl who was super athletic, she was always the PE star, she hovered over me as I was lying on my back in the mud and started mock crying, because she knew that that was what I was about to do, because I was the biggest crybaby. So in addition to being this dreamer girl, always in her head, always in her books and notebooks, I was also the crybaby. And even to this day as an adult, my brother and my boyfriend will do certain things to tease me because they know how I'm going to respond. I can take it in stride now. I'm not like super offended or anything, but people know which buttons to push, and I can't stand that sometimes. But yeah, a lot of times for me, this world is overwhelming. It is overstimulating. It is too loud. There's too much going on. There's too many sounds when people are scrolling on their phones on TikTok and Instagram. And that's why I literally scroll with the sound off, because I just cannot. But I have all of these personality quirks that I had to do some research and really learn that they were normal, that it was okay, that I was not an alien, because I felt like one for the longest time. But it's normal. It's normal to be a Black girl who feels a lot, one who likes being alone, enjoys her own company, who reads and writes and takes walks and does really quiet, chill activities, and everything is not a turn up. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy a turn up. It doesn't mean I don't want to go out, but a lot of times I am fine with just being on my own. But also, too, I don't necessarily want to be just stuck in the house. I am actually not necessarily a homebody. I like going to coffee shops. I like going to parks where there are other people that I may walk past. Like, for example, this morning I went for a walk at one of my favorite parks in DC, and I spoke to almost everybody that I walked past, because I'm a pretty friendly person, even though I am someone who likes their space and their individual time. It's funny because my boyfriend, he's an extrovert. He's a little bit more of an ambivert, where he has characteristics of both, but my boyfriend ain't half as friendly as I am, okay? And also, even though I am an introvert, I really love bringing people together. I used to have a meetup group. I started it when I was 29, and it was called Black Unicorns, and it was all about Black women who have felt different and maybe a little bit misunderstood, maybe a little awkward. It was about bringing those women together. It ended up with over 1,000 members, and we had a lot of fun. We did brunches, we did art events. It was a really great experience. The funny thing about it too was that it's hard to get a group of introverts together because people be canceling, all right? There's a lot of low social batteries in that kind of group. But I want to talk about this site that I like to use to figure out personality types. So it's called 16personalities.com. This is not sponsored. I just like that site because they have really cute graphics. It's very well organized. So that's the one I recommend to everybody. And they do a free version of the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So the result that I typically get, I did get one different result one time, but what I normally get is INFP. So that is introverted, intuitive, feeling, and prospecting. Some sites list it differently. The P will either stand for perceiving or prospecting. I always thought it was perceiving. But anyway, it says that these rare personality types tend to be quiet, open-minded, and imaginative, and they apply a caring and creative approach to everything they do. They have vibrant, passionate inner lives. They happily lose themselves in daydreams. They invent stories and conversations in their mind. They're known for their sensitivity. They can have profound emotional responses to music, to art, to nature, and the people around them. They're known to be extremely sentimental and nostalgic. They often hold on to special keepsakes and memorabilia that brighten their days and fill their heart with joy. This is so me. I still have little trinkets from like when I was 10 years old because I'm super sentimental and everything has some sort of value and all these random dates have value. And I'm just a different type of person. But what I like about 16 personalities is that it breaks the personality types, including introverts and extroverts, into these groups. So there are the analysts, which include the architects, the logicians, the commanders, and debaters. And these are both introverted and extroverted types. Then there are the diplomats, which are the advocates, the mediator, which is what I fall under, the protagonist, which is what my boyfriend is, and the campaigner. Then they have the sentinels, who are the logisticians, defenders, executives, and consuls. And then the explorers are the virtuosos, the adventurers, entrepreneurs, and entertainers. This site does a great job of illustrating the types, grouping the types together so it's not just like an introvert versus an extrovert thing. And in a lot of workplaces, people will take these assessments. I've never taken the Myers-Briggs specifically at work, but I have taken the DISC assessment, which is another type of personality assessment. I've also done the Enneagram, which is where you get the number. I've done so many different assessments, y'all. This is just one type that is really well known and really clear. If you have never taken this assessment, I strongly recommend that you do it, especially if you feel like you're at a point where you aren't really living the way that you want to live. Maybe you're in a career that you don't really enjoy. Maybe you're in a relationship that you don't enjoy. Maybe things aren't really working with your friendships. Maybe you just feel like there is something missing in your life. You might feel like you're out of alignment in some ways in your life. I think understanding your personality type can really help give you clarity on the direction that you should go in. Because I believe that, as children, we know ourselves. We all know what it is that we're into. As children, we just naturally gravitate towards certain things. Once we get older, those passions and that like purity of purpose gets socialized out of us. And we will do things for money. We will do things for practicality. We will do things to impress people, and we forget the truth of ourselves. And so I think going back to the basics, to the building blocks of who you are by finding out your personality type can be really helpful for you to figure out what your next step is. I would also suggest after taking this assessment, print it out, take notes, study it, really think about it. Because I think that when it comes to just like living how we want to live and making changes in our lives, I think having the thoughts in our head is the most inefficient way to go about doing that. We need to actually put the thoughts in a form. We need to put the concepts on paper concretely so that way we can see them and then we can act on them. It's just like creating a vision board. You want to have a physical representation of where it is you're trying to go. And so that's what I did when I was about 24. I remember being at a summer job and printing out all of these documents about my personality type, all these assessments, because I really wanted to become a student of myself so that way I could make better decisions for myself. And obviously there were many, many bumps along the way and still many points where I felt like I had to fit in and I had to conform to other people's expectations of me. But in general, learning my personality type fairly early was great for me. And it's what I recommend to anybody who feels stuck. Because the reality is that we live in a society, specifically Western society, it's very unfriendly to quieter types. People who get their energy from within, people who are okay with being alone, people who don't have to show up and be the biggest and loudest and boldest and brightest in the room. But guess what? Those are the people that keep the lights on. The performer is on stage, but who's controlling the sound? It's somebody in the back that we don't see. That person can cut the mic at any time. So I want to hold space, and we're not going to cut mics out here. That's not the point. It's not a them versus us thing at all. The point is, as introverts, we do important things. We are necessary and critical people on this planet. I come from the world of publishing and communications, and when I tell y'all, the extroverts are the ones that are giving the speech, and the introverts have written it. So don't feel like because you are not super bubbly and outgoing that you're not important, that you're not valuable. So that's why I highly recommend that you take one of these assessments if you have not already. If you have, I would love to know what your personality type is, so you can drop it in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also leave comments on Spotify as well. But I am so looking forward to talking more about introversion, and not just introversion by itself, but how it affects every aspect of our lives. If you are interested, I would love for you to stick around. Please subscribe. Please share this with someone. Please give it a like. Please leave a comment. Please engage, because that really helps me in the algorithm. Also, as an introvert, I will be on camera sometimes and sometimes I will be off. And learning that I need the balance of both, that has been one of the biggest ways that I've grown as an introvert and really held space for myself in a world that expects you to just be on camera all the time. I want to say thank you to everyone who has watched or listened. I so appreciate you being here, and I look forward to chatting with you next time.